41 pages. That is where the novel has stayed for 3 years. 41, exactly, the same 41 pages she opens every few months, reads from the top, and closes again without adding a single word. Tonight she is not writing. She is alphabetizing a bookshelf that was already, more or less, in order. It is 11 p.m. The file sits open in another tab, cursor blinking at the end of a sentence she wrote in a different season of her life, waiting for her to finish it. She will not finish it tonight. She is fairly sure, if she is honest, that she has known this since around 8 o'clock. She would tell you, if you asked, that she is lazy. That she lacks discipline. That some people are simply built to finish things and she is not one of them. It is a tidy explanation, and like most tidy explanations, it is nowhere close to true. She trains for marathons. She has passed licensing exams that eliminate most of the people who attempt them. She is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most disciplined people she knows, right up until the exact moment the task in front of her is the one she has quietly decided actually matters. The explanation on offer, almost everywhere, is a productivity problem. Buy the right planner. Install the right app. Break the task into smaller pieces, set a timer, remove your phone from the room. An enormous industry exists to sell the tools of discipline, on the assumption that if the friction were just slightly lower, the behavior would finally change. For a certain kind of task, this genuinely works. Doing the dishes, replying to an email, filing a form, friction is often the whole problem, and removing it is often the whole solution. But hand the identical toolkit to someone stuck on the one thing they have quietly built their sense of self around, and the tools stop working, sometimes spectacularly. The timer gets set and ignored. The smaller pieces get planned and not started. Something else is happening that a better system does not touch. The psychologists Tim Poiseuille and Fuskia Saiwa spent years studying exactly this gap, and their conclusion runs against almost everything the productivity industry assumes. Procrastination, in their research, is not primarily a time management problem. It is an emotion management problem, wearing a time management costume. Open the file, and something uncomfortable arrives almost immediately. Dread, boredom, a flicker of doubt, a memory of how hard the last page was to write. Close the file, and the discomfort lifts, right away, completely. The relief is real, and it is immediate, and immediate is exactly what an emotional brain is built to chase. You are not failing to start the task. You are succeeding, quite efficiently, at ending a bad feeling. This is why a phone suddenly feels urgent in the 60 seconds before a difficult email, or why an unrelated load of laundry becomes pressing exactly when a hard conversation is due. The task has not changed. The feeling attached to it has. It is a satisfying explanation, and mostly, it is correct. But it leaves one detail unaccounted for. If procrastination were only about escaping an unpleasant feeling, it should get easier to face a task the less that task actually mattered. A low-stakes assignment should provoke less avoidance than a meaningful one. Often, the opposite happens. The task tied to nothing in particular gets finished by Tuesday. The task tied to who she might turn out to be gets a freshly alphabetized bookshelf instead, for 3 years running. Whatever discomfort is being avoided, it is not evenly distributed. It concentrates, with almost suspicious precision, on exactly the tasks that could tell her something true about herself. In the late 1970s, the psychologists Stephen Berglas and Edward Jones described a strategy the mind runs so quietly that most people using it have no idea they are doing it. They called it self-handicapping, arranging, in advance, an obstacle serious enough to explain a possible failure, without ever consciously deciding to sabotage anything. Understaffed. Underslept. Started too late, again. If the outcome disappoints, the obstacle takes the blame. If the outcome somehow succeeds anyway, despite the obstacle, the success counts double. It functions, in effect, as an insurance policy taken out against one's own competence, and the premium is paid in delay. The clock was never the enemy. It was the alibi. A deadline missed by accident is simply a mistake. A deadline missed on purpose, quietly, unconsciously, again and again, on the one thing that matters most, that is no longer an accident. It is a defense, prepared long before anyone asked a question. As long as the manuscript stays at 41 pages, it can never be finished and rejected. It can only be imagined, and imagined novels are, without exception, extraordinary. Picture it less like writer's block and more like a private courtroom, convened before any crime has actually been committed. A single figure standing before an empty bench, quietly assembling a folder of extenuating circumstances for a verdict no one else was ever going to deliver. No judge sits on that bench. There was only ever one person deciding the sentence, and the same person building the case against it. The unfinished version stays alive in the mind in a way most finished things never do. In the 1920s, the psychologist Bloomer Zygarnik noticed that people remember interrupted or unfinished tasks far more vividly than tasks they have already completed and closed. A finished thing settles. An unfinished thing keeps humming quietly in the background, still open, still possible, still, crucially, still undecided. 41 pages is not a failure to progress. It is a decision, made without ever feeling like a decision, to keep the verdict permanently pending. None of this is specific to novels. Everyone is quietly protecting some version of this: the business plan that stays a plan, the degree application that stays a draft, the conversation that stays unhad, the apology that stays unsent. Each one gets the same unconscious logic applied to it. As long as it remains hypothetical, it remains perfect. The moment it becomes real, it becomes gradable. Most people are not actually protecting their time. They are protecting the last uncontested place where they still get to be extraordinary, a version of themselves that exists only in potential, never yet measured against the actual world, and therefore never yet found wanting. Ask her why 41, specifically, and she will not have an answer ready. But page 42, it turns out, was where the story required her protagonist to fail publicly at the one thing the character wanted most. She stopped, without deciding to stop, at the exact sentence that would have forced her to write failure convincingly enough to believe in it. Writing that scene meant sitting, even briefly, inside the feeling of not being good enough. Not writing it meant she never had to find out whether she could survive that feeling, or whether the feeling was ever really about the character at all. This is worth sitting with gently, because it is not an accusation. Whatever you have left unfinished, the delay is very likely not evidence that you don't care enough to finish it. It may be closer to the opposite, evidence that you care so much, the not knowing has started to feel safer than the knowing. That is not laziness. That is a fully rational strategy, run by a nervous system trying to protect something it cannot afford to lose. It is simply aimed at the wrong threat. Every era has its version of the unfinished manuscript. The business idea discussed at length and never filed. The song that exists only as a voice memo. The apology composed in the shower 100 times and never once out loud. In each case, the person holding it is not failing to act. They are succeeding at something else entirely, keeping a verdict open, indefinitely, on a version of themselves too valuable to risk losing. Perhaps the actual work was never finishing the thing at all. Perhaps it was only ever finding out whether she could survive knowing. So maybe the real question isn't why the manuscript still has 41 pages. Maybe it's simpler than that, and harder. Would you rather find out what you're capable of, or would you rather keep wondering?